Hello friends, and welcome to Figure Study, where we're finally looking at what is technically one of my top figures from last year, but at the same time not. That is the Ocular Max, aka Mastermind Creations, Perfection Series PS04A Azalea Alternative. This is their version of Arcee, only this is the alternative version, which is kind of a mishmash of the two versions that came before. Not like they have like, I think, a protoform version that was released as a con exclusive somewhat recently, and then there was also the paramedic, the green and white one that they released as another con exclusive. But there was the black version, which I had and no longer have, and then the pink version, which I had and no longer have, and now there's this version, which is kind of a mixture of those two, where you've got sort of more or less the same skeleton as the black version, which is to say it's the same as the pink version except the feet are a little different, and then more of like the pink version's color scheme, except it's more, I guess, cartoon accurate versus toy. It's kind of like how Generations Arcee, the Takar version, she had some gray bits. I think her stomach was gray, and then like the Hasbro version, her stomach was white, and she had some like black bits in there. It's kind of like a difference like that, where the pink version that I used to have had different feet and a slightly different color scheme, different hues and stuff like that. I wanted to get this one because I just liked the way this one looked better. So here we are. And yes, I am at long last looking at Ocular Max Azalea. This is a figure that I feel like I've talked about a few times over the past year plus and never actually made a video on, so I'm doing that now with the alternative version. And unfortunately, I no longer have the other two figures, as I mentioned, so I can't do a comparison, but they're basically this with some minor tweaks like colors and some slight molding in the feet. And this is a very Arcee looking hover car Cybertronian vehicle-ish mode with a lot of robot folded up under there. But what's nice about this is, technically speaking, like with most Arcees, almost her entire alt mode shell is a backpack, but this tidies up a lot better, and there is a lot of robot hiding under that. So this isn't quite as ridiculous as Earthrise Arcee, where the entire robot's just kind of barely concealed under the shell. This is going to be impressive. We'll see that when we get to the size comparisons. She is a more or less typical Arcee looking car thing with like the kind of bubbly wheel wells and that interesting kind of sloped front with the very distinct headlights and grille. I do wish that this windscreen section was a little bit darker. I mean, you know, it's open, so it's not like it's going to hide any of the stuff that's going on in here, but it doesn't read very well. Like, it's kind of easy to not notice that it's there, and I feel like if that was a darker blue, it would stand out better. I like that there is an interior, as limited as it is, but there's like a little kind of pseudo control panel on the back of what is her robot mode head. There are little seats in there that are really kind of silly and pointless, but they're there. She's got her little fin thing, and I currently have her guns plugged into the back because that's where they store. They just tab into these little slots here, those little pegs there. And this folds out, that folds out, and there are her pistols, and we'll see those more when we get into the robot mode. But there's a better look at that spoiler thing. And yeah, this figure is very cool. I mean, it was my favorite figure of 2019, or one of my favorite figures of 2019 for a reason. And this version is just as cool. The color scheme is pretty much typical Arcee, white and pink, with a little bit of gray. But I do like that there are some slightly different tones of pink, where it's the darker pink, and then there's just a couple of hints of that lighter pink, and then you get a little bit more of that when you get to robot mode. The whites are nice and bright. They don't seem that different from each other. Primarily like how you've got the leg bits here, and then the back here, stuff here, back of the head. The whites all seem to match pretty well. Now, one thing I do want to point out with the car, there's this alternate back piece thing that I'm not going to put in, but essentially you can pop this out, pop this in, and it just gives her like a flatter, non-spoilery spike, whatever that is, antenna thing on the back, and that's more in line with the darker pink color. But I don't like that. I like Arcee to have that big, ridiculous spike thing on her back, so I've put that in there. Anyway, let's move straight on to size comparisons, because really the robot mode is where this figure's at. So, this is where things start to get really interesting with this figure, because if you'll notice, her alt mode is actually smaller than a standard deluxe. She's way shorter. She's not as long, roughly about as wide at the back, but that's about it. Like, this is a much bigger vehicle mode than this. Though I will say, because of the die-cast and the extremely dense engineering going on here, this is significantly heavier than this, even though it doesn't look like it. But just, let's just put a pin in that, for lack of a better term. Just remember, her alt mode is smaller than a deluxe. And here she is with the duck tank. Okay, let's turn this into a robot. And this is one of the reasons why I was a little bit hesitant to do a video on this figure at first, because getting her back into her vehicle mode was a bit tricky when I had the other versions, and that was more because I just hadn't realized some of the nuances. Like when you collapse the legs in, you want to make sure they're collapsed all the way in. It's really easy to not have them collapsed in all the way, but not realize it. You know, little nuances like that made it really tricky to get her back into her alt mode, but now that I've kind of got it figured out, it's fine. So anyway, to the robot. And here we have Ocular Max's Azalea alternative in her robot mode, and this is a very impressive looking Arcee. And I was really looking forward to getting some kind of masterpiece-ish Arcee over the years, and what we're left with is a pretty spectacular looking Arcee. I mean, yeah, there are some panel lines in a few areas. There's like this weird kind of heart rate monitor thing going through her chest, but it still looks really cool. The proportions are overall really great. I feel like, if I'm being nitpicky, her torso is a little boxy compared to the rest of her, which is a little less squared off, but given the nature of the transformation and how well this figure compacts down, because I mean, when we do size comparisons, oh boy. But given everything that this figure does and how well she does it, I really don't care that her torso is just a little boxy looking. The colors are great. You get way more white now. It kind of inverts, where before you had mostly dark pink and then a little bit of white, a little bit of that lighter pink. Now it's like a lot more white, a lot less of the dark pink, and then more of the lighter pink. She has high heels, but as with the black version that I talked about briefly in my favorites video, as with that figure, she's really stable. Like, you put her down and she's not going anywhere. Like, she's not that easy to knock over. You knock into her hard enough and she's going to fall over, but, you know, it's not like, you know, if you shake the table, she's not going anywhere. She's extremely solid, and it's partially because from her legs, like, pretty much from her knees down is almost entirely die-cast, I think. It just feels like die-cast. I think her hips up here also, like just the tops up here, are also die-cast. So yeah, she's got a decent amount of heft and solidity for a figure that you wouldn't necessarily think would have that. Detail-wise, as I mentioned, she's got the kind of high-heeled look, which I think is fine. The flat-footed version of the figure is, and that's what the original pink one had going for it, that it's like the main difference. It had flat feet that weren't pointed at the toe, but yeah, technically a little bit more stable, but this figure is still really stable. And there's some nice molded details going up the shins and the rest of the legs. It kind of sort of blends in with the panel lines, but there's also a lot of rivets in here, and I don't know. I wonder if maybe I could just go in there with some white paint and just dab a little bit on the edges of those pins to make them blend in a little better. I might try that. I don't know. I know some people have issues with the visible joints in the hips, and I do understand why that might be a turnoff, because it's a bit egregious, but you get a little bit of that gray down in the knees too, and that's more cosmetic than anything. I feel like it kind of ties it together, and also down in the ankles. Plus, the hips are nice because they allow you to do that action figure thing where you can pull them down, and that kind of clicks them down, and it not only can make her taller, but it allows for a much greater range of forward motion, because if you try to move her leg forward without pulling down, that's about as far as it goes. Pulling down, it's almost to a full 90. So I appreciate how much you get in terms of like joint options. I also appreciate how she's got this amazing knee. It is actually a double jointed knee, and if you use the lower joint, it bends even further, though it looks a little bit less nice. And this is actually where the issue with transformation comes in, because it's really easy to move the upper joint, and that doesn't work right. You want to move that lower joint, and that's what allows you to bring the leg in as far as you need to. She even has like some not insignificant ab crunch that goes forward and back and can rotate a bit. The rotation's not great, but it gets the job done. And for the kind of midsection torso area, there is some detailing there as well with like the molding and stuff like that, and thankfully she does kind of have that stupid belly button, but it's more robotic and square looking, so it could just be panel detail and not actually a belly button. And I like to pretend it's not a belly button because giving her a belly button is really stupid. She's a robot. She's not born like a mammal, so she wouldn't have a belly button. Anyway, she has that kind of, I guess it's iconic, I don't know, but it's indicative of the character, that kind of white and pink separation in the torso where it kind of comes up at a point. Since the telltale white collar and then the various shades of pink all along the arm there. And one thing to note too with the arms, this seems to be less of an issue with this version because this joint isn't as tight as it was on the other versions that I had, but the bicep swivel that's up there was pretty tight on the other figures that I had, and I'd seen on TFW some people had snapped the elbow because they were trying to turn the bicep down here. And because that's looser, I don't think that's as much of a concern now, but just to be on the safe side, if you have this figure or any of the other Ocular Max Azaleas, just grab at the bicep to turn it, just to be on the safe side. Also, she's got this really, really nice double elbow, and she's actually got a ball-jointed fist, which I like very much. As for the head is very Arcee. She's got the Princess Leia bun helmet. She's got the very kind of Arcee face. I've got the face on there with the goggles because this is just how I prefer the look. But you do get additional faces. You get her regular face, which is fine. You get her smiling face, which is good. And you get her not smiling as much face. And to swap these out, you just pry this out, which isn't really that hard, it's just my fingernails aren't super long. So pop this out, and then this is pegged in on the inside of that helmet piece, so just slide that back. We'll bring in, let's bring in the grinning face, and that will slide in and peg into there, and then just slide this back in place. And there she is, looking all happy to be here. Another thing that's cool about this is you get multiple hands. Unfortunately, it's easiest to transform her with the fists in place because those tuck into the front of the car the best. You can transform her with the other hands in place, but she ends up with this kind of finger mustache for the car mode, which looks really odd. But in terms of hands, she's got the two fists. She has two relaxed hands. She has two relaxed hands with the index finger pointed slightly further out. And you can kind of tell when you look at that next to the regular relaxed hands. And she's got two gun-holding hands, which we will put her guns into. And this is actually kind of cool. The guns just slide into her hand, and then her fingers wrap around, her index finger goes through the trigger, and that's it. They don't have to peg in or anything like that. Her hands are just very nicely molded to hold the guns, and they don't fall out. That's the wheels rattling. They don't fall out, and she holds them extremely well. And let's just take a minute to appreciate how easy it is to get her into some rather dynamic looking poses. This is pretty darn cool. She's actually fun to pose and really nicely posable, which is not something that I could say for a lot of the other Arcee figures that I have. Which is to say, the two others that I have. But yeah, this is a great figure. Now, before we move on to size comparisons, there's just one other thing I want to go over. With regards to the hands, swapping them is super easy because it's just a ball joint that's on the hand, so you just pop it out. And these are made of a soft-ish plastic. I wouldn't call it rubbery, but there's a little bit of give to it. And so you just pop the hands out, pop the other hands in, and that's all you got to do to switch the hands. Another thing that's cool is the guns. This is a thing that was not available on the black version of this figure, but it was available on the flat-footed pink version. Thankfully, they retained this feature for Azalea Alternative, and that is there's a little peg hole on either side of both guns that can peg onto these little pegs on the hips that are used to hold these flaps in place in car mode. And so you can just peg those on and holster her guns. And that is fantastic. I love that. And I really wish that the black version had that too, but oh well, whatever. And yeah, it's just this figure is great. Like, transformation makes a lot of sense. It pulls off some absolute magic. And just as an action figure, she's actually quite fun to mess with because she has a lot of posability, and she also has a fair number of fun accessories to mess with. I do wish that maybe there was a way for them to give her posable hands, or just have like a specific pair of hands so that she didn't have to swap them out when going through vehicle mode and whatnot, but it's okay. Like, you can technically use the other hands, it just doesn't look as good in vehicle mode. But anyway, now I want to talk more about just how impressive the engineering on this figure is, because remember that thing I told you to remember before about the size comparisons and how her alt mode was smaller than a deluxe? Like, noticeably smaller? Here she is next to the standard deluxe squad once again, and look at this! Look at how much of a size difference there is here. This is incredible. There is so much robot that's so cleverly folded up into that super tiny futuristic car kind of mode that it's just amazing to me how this vehicle that was so much smaller than Downshift here ends up becoming this robot that is so much taller than Downshift. It's extremely cool. And here she is with the duck tank. So that is gonna do it for Ocular Max Azalea Alternative. As I've said before, I absolutely love this figure, and it was one of my favorite figures from pretty sure 2019 for a very good reason. There's a lot of posability, she's extremely stable, fun to mess with, the transformation makes perfect sense, you just gotta know what to do where. Like, if you don't fold down those seats on the car, then you're not gonna be able to snap the backpack in properly. But yeah, as long as you know what to look out for on this figure, which I feel like with this one, they did a decent amount of adjustments that fix that. One quick thing before I go, though. The black version of this figure, the heels were designed to rotate 180 degrees so that you could, well, actually they rotated 360, but they were designed to rotate so that these would be more level with the back of the car and not pointing down weirdly. This version, for whatever reason, no longer does that. So when I tried to twist one of the heels, I ended up twisting it off completely, and I had to Gorilla Glue it back on. I can't remember which heel it was now, but the Gorilla Glue has held, as you can tell. She still is able to stand and all that, but if you do get this figure, don't try to rotate the heels. It will only end in heartbreak. But other than that, there's nothing else to worry about on this figure. I know it sounds like I'm throwing out all of these, oh, be careful of this, be careful of that, but really, this figure is fantastic. I would say if you're looking for a masterpiece-ish Arcee, I would suggest the Ocular Max version, because I think it looks better than any of the other alternatives, and the transformation, granted we don't know what the transformation is in the official Arcee, but the transformation makes a lot of sense. But that is going to do it. I have talked enough about Perfection Series PS04A Azalea Alternative. What do you all think of this figure, or any of the other color versions that Ocular Max has put out? I, for one, am hoping they do a few more recolors of this mold, maybe Prime Arcee colors. I saw someone do like a digibash of that on TFW and it looked really cool. I just feel like they could get more mileage out of this mold, and it's a very good mold, and they've gotten lots of mileage out of it so far, but I would not be opposed to them doing more with it. But whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all, and remember, art is more than meets the eye.